The New York skyline glowed with the soft hues of the setting sun as Ethan Westbrook adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at his reflection in the mirror. Every detail was perfect: the tailored Armani suit, the smooth wave of his dark blonde hair, and the confident set of his jaw. At 32, Ethan had built upon his family's vast fortune and expanded their real estate empire into something truly formidable. He was the CEO of Westbrook Enterprises, a billionaire in his own right, and the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. But despite all the power, wealth, and success he'd accumulated, he now found himself facing a situation he couldn't negotiate his way out of: an arranged marriage. Ethan didn't believe in fairy tale endings or soulmates. His relationships had always been transactional, calculated, and short-lived. He never saw the point of love when it came with complications. But tradition had a strange way of catching up with even the most modern of men. Years ago, his mother had made a pact with her best friend, a promise sealed over wine and laughter in the Hamptons. If their children were still unmarried by 30, they would consider an arranged marriage. What began as a casual agreement suddenly gained weight when Ethan passed his 30th birthday and the media became obsessed with his bachelor status. His mother, tired of the scandals and superficial relationships, brought up the old promise and reached out to the Brooks family. Madeline Brooks, her daughter, was nothing like the women Ethan dated. She wasn't flashy or obsessed with luxury. At 29, she was a literature professor at Columbia University, deeply passionate about poetry, novels, and teaching. She lived in a modest brownstone in Brooklyn and spent her weekends in coffee shops or wandering through bookstores. When her father told her about the marriage arrangement, she laughed out loud and dismissed it as outdated nonsense. But after weeks of persuasion and reminders of their family's legacy, she agreed to at least meet Ethan. She was convinced he would be just like the headlines described: arrogant, self-absorbed, and emotionally unavailable. They met for the first time at an upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early, as always, and scanned the room with cool detachment. When Madeline walked in, wearing a simple blue dress and a calm expression, he stood up and offered a smile that was more of a challenge than a greeting. "You're exactly how I imagined you'd be," she said as she sat across from him. "And how's that?" Ethan replied, intrigued. "Too polished. Too rich. Too sure of yourself," she said, picking up the menu without flinching. "And you're not what I expected," Ethan said, studying her. "Let me guess," she said dryly. "You thought I'd be desperate to marry a billionaire?" "No," he said honestly. "I thought you'd cancel." That surprised her. For the next hour, they shared tense conversation over wine and appetizers. She asked him about his business. He asked about her work. They disagreed on almost everything: money, marriage, art, politics. By the end of the evening, Madeline stood up, placed her napkin on the table, and looked him in the eye. "I'll never love you," she said firmly. Ethan looked up at her, amused. "I'm not asking you to." The next few days were a whirlwind of family meetings, legal documents, and quiet pressure. Madeline tried to back out more than once, but her father reminded her that the union would bring stability and respect back to both families. Ethan, on the other hand, accepted the arrangement with an almost unnerving calm. He treated it like a business merger, a contract with long-term benefits. They were married in a small, private ceremony at the Westbrook estate. No media, no grand reception, just close family and a judge. Madeline wore a classic ivory gown, her expression unreadable. Ethan looked as polished as ever. When they said their vows, it was more out of obligation than emotion. And when they kissed, it was brief and mechanical. The following day, Madeline moved into Ethan's penthouse in Midtown. The space was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, and sleek furniture. But it felt cold, like a showroom. She took the guest bedroom and made it her own, filling it with books and soft lights. They barely saw each other the first week. Ethan left early for meetings and returned late. Madeline taught her classes and avoided unnecessary conversations. But slowly, their paths began to cross. Ethan noticed how she left little notes on the kitchen counter, quotes from novels, reminders about groceries, or random observations. He started making her coffee in the mornings, exactly how she liked it. She began watching the news with him in the evenings and occasionally joined him for dinner. Their conversations shifted from combative to curious. One evening, Madeline returned home to find a new bookshelf in her room. It was handcrafted, made of dark walnut, and already half filled with titles she loved. She stared at it for a long time before knocking on Ethan's door. "Did you do this?" she asked. He looked up from his laptop.
"Yeah."
"Thought you could use more space." "Thank you," she said, and for the first time, her voice was soft. That night, they sat on the balcony, sipping wine and watching the city lights. Ethan told her about his childhood, how his father's constant travels and his mother's social life left him raised by nannies and tutors. Madeline shared stories about her late mother, how they used to read poetry together on rainy afternoons. The distance between them began to shrink. But just as they were finding rhythm, things took a turn. A scandal involving one of Ethan's business partners made headlines. Reporters swarmed the building. Madeline, overwhelmed by the attention, retreated to her Brooklyn apartment. Ethan didn't stop her. For the first time in weeks, he felt the emptiness of the penthouse. A week passed. Then another. He sent her messages, simple check-ins, jokes, links to articles he thought she'd enjoy. She didn't reply. Then one afternoon she walked into his office. He looked up, startled. "I'm not good at this," she said. "At marriage. At feelings." "Neither am I," he said quietly. "But I missed you," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stood and walked toward her. "You said you'd never love me."
"I did," she said.
"And maybe I still don't. But I feel something. And it scares me." "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But I don't want to lose whatever this is." They embraced, not out of passion, but out of understanding. From that moment, their relationship began to shift again. They attended events together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners. Ethan introduced her to clients as his brilliant wife who keeps him grounded. Madeline invited him to speak to her students about entrepreneurship. They fought, of course, about late nights, broken promises, clashing schedules, but they always came back to each other. Next part comes soon. Thanks for watching.